This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real events or persons is purely coincidental. This story is purely fictional and does not promote or encourage any form of violence. Counsel was a projection on my part, and a good one at that. Tyler agreed. Tyler thought about what the marshal was saying. Clearly, his return so early and in such good health would serve to make him more popular in the eyes of the public and the military. This would work against the Emperor's plans to retire him for fear of the public backlash. Tyler tapped the Admiral's memories as a strategist and deduced how the surprise return would have had a greater impact politically. If the Emperor had no time to prepare, then the Admiral and his staff would have quickly resumed power. I understand the dilemma. We missed an opportunity to regain our power without a nasty fight. Can't we still use this return to our advantage? Tyler thought about Tusia once more, and her father's needed position on the council. Unfortunately, they'd alienated many on the council, so that avenue seemed remote. 122. Admiral's Ghost. Well, we could. The Marshal didn't sound certain. There are many elements in the military that would prefer your leadership to that of the Vice Admiral. Their faith in your abilities will be restored with your early return. Of course, I've already been working that angle, scheduling interviews with key personnel who support you. The Marshal leaned forward, a look of promise replacing his concern. I suppose that in some ways Commander Tradine has already begun that process. Tyler's mind leaped ahead. Of course, he exclaimed. We marshal our support in the military, and Vice Admiral Thiessen will have no other option than to step aside for the triumphant return of his Supreme Commander. Yes, the Marshal agreed. Then the Emperor would have no choice but to publicly acknowledge your rightful return. In fact, he would have to issue an official proclamation of your return to duty and announce his faith in your fitness to take over the war effort. Yes, we may not be out of this game yet. The Marshal finished his wine and stood up. Admiral, I beg your leave that I may tend to some avenues on this new approach. Tyler smiled, so formal, and yet the Marshal was clearly happy with the turn of events. Tyler was also happy. For the first time since becoming the Admiral, he felt like he had made some of his own conclusions and contributed to a new strategy. Sure, he had relied upon the Admiral's memories to guide him, but the projections felt like his own. Yes, Marshal. He raised his glass. Thank you for your continued support and loyalty. I'll see you in the morning. The Marshal bowed slightly before leaving, a renewed spring in his step. Tyler watched the Marshal retreat as he downed his last glass. He glanced across the room at the other bottle, but decided against opening it. Tomorrow would be busy. Tyler slept restlessly, tossing and turning in the enormous bed. Dreams, nightmares, and stressful thoughts plagued his sleep. Some were his own, but many were the Admiral's. With only a week before their return to the capital, the activity around the palace had become frenzied. Fortunately, Tyler was exempt from most of the activity, as his key role was to prepare for the big gala the Marshal scheduled for their return. Calm before the storm, 23, it would kick off with a large press conference outside the Supreme Military Command headquarters, where a parade of experts, military personnel, and medical doctors would prepare the public for the miraculous recovery of their national hero. The Admiral's staff prepared an exemplary speech Tyler would present, and Tyler had spent the last couple days practicing it before memorizing it perfectly. With the newfound abilities to remember everything, a single speech seemed remarkably easy. However, his delivery still fell short of expectations, but he assured his staff he would have it down before the event despite his lagging confidence. It was these inadequacies that kept him restless. Though he gained more confidence each day, there were times when the Tyler in him desired to escape into the universe, to flee where things were simpler. Those thoughts haunted his dreams. Occasionally, memories of Linda drifted through his awareness. Where was she? What was she doing? Had she married? Tyler knew the question might never be answered, but that only drove him further from the sleep he needed. He drifted in and out, feeling disconnected from everything around him. Like a remote observer, perhaps like Adani, he watched himself toss and turn from above. Suddenly, the door to his room opened, a lone figure slipping in through the darkness. The disconnected part of his awareness saw only a shape moving across the floor, but the restless Tyler below him stirred briefly, a glowing figure moving to the bed. Was this a dream, or was this real? Through tired eyes, he watched the lone figure, their bodies' heat a glowing halo. They shed a simple gown, moving gently under the covers beside him. It must have been a dream, else why did he feel no level of concern from this intrusion? It felt like a dream despite the soft, warm body reaching out to him. In the recesses of his sleep-dulled mind, he worked out it must be Illyria. Who else in the palace would dare such a brazen act with their commander? He tried to speak, but delicate fingers reached out, pressing his lips gently. Through his strange night vision, he made out the glowing face next to him, but couldn't accept what he saw. She moved over top of him, and he knew he was dreaming. The angelic face above him was that of Tusia. Dream or not, he wanted her like no one before. He was mesmerized by her beauty as her naked skin danced with multiple 124 Admiral's ghost colors flashing in fantastic patterns. He imagined his own skin dancing in response and felt his excitement grow. His hands reached out to caress her body, his fingers exciting her delicate breasts with his touch. The glow of her skin pulsed with excitement, pacing the passion he felt within himself. The people of Pulto shared a similar anatomy with humans, even their genitalia. Tyler had delved into the Admiral's memories for examples of lovemaking, and the Admiral's affair with Illyria had, at its peak, been sexually active. The Admiral used the sexual release as his primary stress reducer. Like humans, the males possessed a penis. Although thin and long, it was completely contained within the body when flaccid. When excited, it moved out to merge with the female. As Tyler penetrated the dream Tusia, both arched with intense pleasure as their skin reacted with a brilliant display of pastel colors. Once inside, Tyler felt himself swell, filling her completely as pleasure took over his mind and senses. He watched from below as she closed her eyes, throwing her head back rhythmically, moving to the music of their passion. Her skin pulsated with hypnotic colors, and Tyler bonded with an intense feeling of love. So great was the feeling, Tyler wondered how the Admiral had ever left the woman. As if in slow motion, Tyler watched her arch with an orgasm that made her skin fluoresce a brilliant red. Her genitalia pulsed with excitement, wrapping tighter around him. The pulsing increased, bringing him towards an apex he longed for. With a burst of blinding light, he exploded into her, the release sending cascading waves of pleasure through his body. Tusia responded with greater waves of orgasmic pleasure, until Tyler was lost in vertigo. He had no idea how long the orgasms lasted, or when they had finally separated from each other. The dream was over, and at long last, Tyler fell into a restful sleep. He didn't care if the dream was only fantasy constructed from the Admiral's memories. He had needed the release from the stress and anxiety of his new position. Tyler slept a deep and tranquil sleep. Tyler rose from the large bed late in the morning. He was alone. Considering the hour, he was surprised the staff hadn't woke calm before the storm 125 him earlier. Rumors of his sleeplessness had spread through the staff, and concerns for their boss's recovery overrode duty. He mentally thanked them for the needed sleep, as he felt more refreshed than any other time since becoming the Admiral. The needed rest renewed his sense of purpose, and he felt a greater resolve to be the Admiral everyone would rally behind. For the first time since they'd planned it, he looked forward to their return to the capital. He knew many obstacles would bar their way, but the Admiral inside wouldn't back down from the fight. As he started the day, he was upset there was no trace of the experience the night before. It had seemed so real, he could barely believe it was only a dream. The intense love he felt for the Admiral's wife lingered, but the effect was uplifting rather than depressing. A part of him believed there was no hope in reconciling their differences, but he vowed to try to mend the wounds anyway. The Admiral's carelessness created the chasm, so it seemed only fitting he be the one to bridge the gap. Tyler finished his ablutions and dressed in a semi-formal uniform, ready to greet the day. The kitchen staff always waited for his appearance before starting breakfast. This morning, he felt an enormous hunger. He left the quarters for the dining room where he would eat alone. He looked forward to being alone to catch up on the day's news and agenda. Once alerted to the Admiral's presence, the palace staff put in motion the morning ballet that was the daily routine. He knew from experience that once breakfast was underway, staff members would descend on his bedroom, changing the linens and cleaning the bathroom. Tyler thought the servitude extravagant, but over time, he became accustomed to the lavish lifestyle. As he rounded the last corner of the hallway, he came to the double doors leading into the dining room. As usual, a servant stood with doors open, bowing as Tyler walked past to take his seat at the table. Tyler had told the head of his staff that the bowing made him uncomfortable, but the person in charge had assured Tyler the staff could not stop even if they wanted. The Admiral was the greatest national hero since the Emperor who united their planet, and everyone felt a debt of gratitude for his great service. They showed respect in one of the simplest ways they knew. Tyler couldn't argue the point, so once again, he grew accustomed, accepting it as just one more part of the Admiral's world. 126 of Admiral's Ghost. His usual seat was set and ready for his meal. He preferred the end of the table, where it was closer to the large fireplace, dominating the room. It was more than a dining room. A great room, created to entertain large numbers of dinner guests. Throughout the room, large sitting areas were filled with plush seating, and even the fireplace was surrounded by cushioned seating, ideal for intimate moments. Spanning the front of the fireplace, a large, overstuffed sofa softened the formal atmosphere the room generally maintained. Tyler guessed the couch could easily accommodate 8, and it was flanked by a smaller sofa on the left and a large chair on the right. It provided a more comfortable tone to the room that made Tyler more relaxed. He sat at the end of the table behind the large chair on his right. It gave him a great view of the entrance while being close enough to feel warmth from the fire. The table was set with dishware and utensils he still hadn't figured out. He wondered why the table remained set when no one but he ate there. However, the full table did take away the loneliness. Per his instructions, his setting included a small video tablet next to a glass of gunji juice he'd come to enjoy. He likened it to a combination of bananas and raspberry, although he never would have picked that combination on Earth. Perhaps the Admiral's palate was sufficiently different to admire the unusual combination. His video tablet contained notable news stories, the daily agenda, and logistical data the staff wanted him to review. Fortunately, today's schedule was nearly clear while everyone completed the travel preparations. With only one meeting on the docket, he felt like touring the vineyards and winery. Since arriving in Tuland, he'd been cooped up in the palace tending wounds and managing matters of military import. Since they'd be leaving soon, he would miss the opportunity to experience the full value of the Admiral's estate. Although he could easily review it from memories, he wanted to experience it himself. Besides, he convinced himself he needed to get out in the fresh air. Despite the enormous size of the palace, he felt claustrophobic. Tyler drank his juice, waiting for the morning tea. It was made from the leaves of an ancestral tree that was a mainstay in their diet since anyone could remember. Even today, the traditional methods of drying the leaves and crushing them before steeping was calm before the storm 137 maintained. It was an integral part of their culture, carried over from an arboreal history. Tyler found the tea wonderful and believed the folklore that told of great healing powers. Healing powers aside, it was the tintian Tyler was after. The chemical stimulant was overly abundant within the leaves, and it filled the void of coffee from Earth. He knew this was its true value to the culture. The head server, an older man named Kulin, placed the steaming tea gently on a small plate to Tyler's right. As usual, he added a syrupy substance made from a root extract that served as the primary sweetener on pulto. Tyler thought it too sweet, but insisted on a small quantity to cut the bitterness inherent in the tea. Kulin finished the preparation before running down the morning's menu. Tyler nodded acceptance before turning on one of the video monitors he'd installed to watch the morning news. Too engrossed in finding his favorite shows, Tyler ignored Kulin as he walked to the large chair beside him. Tyler thought he heard Kulin speaking to someone, but he was too close to locating his favorite channel to notice. When his morning broadcast was finally playing, he turned his attention to Kulin speaking softly to someone in the chair. Tyler was curious. No one ever came into the room while he was eating. He assumed it was the marshal, although he thought it odd he had remained so quiet. "Yes. Thank you, Kulin. I'd love another cup." The voice was distinctively female. "Yes, ma'am. I'll return with it straight away." Kulin moved toward the kitchen while Tyler wrestled his confusion. Was that really a female voice he'd heard? Who? Illyria. He doubted she would be so bold to interrupt the Admiral so early without an invitation. "Good morning," he ventured. "Would you care to join me for breakfast?" He waited patiently, uncertain who would respond. The voice remained quiet before slowly answering. The woman sounded petulant. "Well, Naylan, after so long you do not even recognize the voice of your own wife. I'm hurt." He fell silent, tongue-tied with shock. Tusia stood up elegantly from the chair and moved toward the table. Once again, he was mesmerized by her beauty as the dream from the night before rushed back. He reeled with the possibilities. Had it been a 128 Admiral's ghost dream? Had it been real? Or was it some premonition of her appearance? He was speechless. She walked gracefully around the table and sat next to Tyler. She wore a shimmering gold single suit open at the throat, plunging just enough to show cleavage. Her hair was twirled and bound in a fashion Tyler noted was common these days, and it was held in place by a gold clasp shaped like a leaf. Her face, soft and sensuous, carried a look of concern as she sat back in her chair, staring directly at Tyler. He was too shocked to respond. In his mind, a play of strong emotions overwhelmed him. Dare he ask about last night? What if it had been a dream? Why did he feel this intense love? Would she reciprocate all those letters he'd written and messages he'd left? He'd assumed she'd never come see him. Why now? Had it been a dream? He wasn't certain and feared the memories would give him away. "Glad to see you too, Naylan." She spoke softly, continuing her measured and patient stare. He stuttered desperately, unable to form the appropriate response. "Please don't let me interrupt your morning rituals," she said without malice. It was not my intention to fluster you. Flustered, he looked at his hands and saw the gentle play of light fluorescing on his skin. He was excited, and she knew it. Damn. He struggled to control the emotions, but thought he saw a small flicker of light move across her face. Was it only wishful thinking on his part? "Why are you here?" he managed to ask. "Don't get too worked up. I am here at the request of Marshal Sliss. He is concerned about your return to duty. As you know, we all believe the Emperor does not want your return. Therefore, we expect resistance." She paused, staring at his fluorescing skin once more. "Fortunately, your popularity will make it difficult for the Emperor to deny you, so we are trying to decipher how he will play this." She stopped, letting Tyler absorb her words. He tried to control his thoughts, and his skin finally returned to normal. He was embarrassed, but the memories from the night were still too fresh. At this critical juncture, she began again. "A division between us would not be prudent, as it could provide the necessary fodder to keep you out of power. Calm before the storm, 129. Again, she paused. Was she choked up? Tyler couldn't tell, but her voice wavered slightly. "My presence in your life during this period will be purely political. It is in my own interests, and those of my family, to play your wife until you are once again Supreme Commander. Until that time, I will remain with you and offer my counsel." She slumped slightly. The pressure of the speech lifted. He was both excited and saddened at the same time. He wanted nothing more than to have her by his side, but her reluctance to play his wife filled him with sorrow. He realized the night must have been a dream. She stared at the table, unable or unwilling to look at him. He was going to respond when Kulin returned with her tea and Tyler's breakfast. They sat silently while the servers laid it out efficiently. Neither showed emotion, but Tyler was torn inside. He needed her counsel, but more than that, he needed her love. Dream or not, his feelings for her were real, and he fought to hold them to himself. The servers worked silently, obviously sensing the tension between the heads of the estate. Their marital problems were well known to the palace staff, and it had been years since they were together at Twoland. The servers finished before heading back to the kitchen, leaving Kulin standing quietly beside the table. "Is there anything else I may get you?" Kulin asked patiently, with no sign of discomfort. Tyler gave him a reassuring smile. "No thank you, Kulin. This looks wonderful." "Very good, sir. Please ring if you need anything." As quietly as he had come, Kulin slipped out of the room. Tyler went on the offensive. "Tusia, I cannot tell you how happy I am to see you. I know this is hard, but I really have changed. I understand the pain and isolation I caused you in the past, but I desperately want to make up for it now. All I ask is one chance." He hoped his pleas sounded sincere. "Would you care for some breakfast?" "No, thank you. I ate when I arrived." Well, Tyler thought, that answered the question of last night. He felt disappointed, but held on to hope. She hadn't immediately rejected him, but then she wasn't warming up either. "Well, good. Very good," he said softly. 130 Admiral's ghost. He backed off, falling silent while he ate. He tried to sort out the feelings he had for this new twist in the Admiral's affairs. He knew being with her would make it difficult to conceal his feelings, but he feared showing them would upset her even more. He didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable in a situation she could not escape. He ate silently as they both watched the daily newscast. He didn't pay attention to what was being said while he was caught up in his inner turmoil. He figured she was also fighting her own inner demons, but outwardly, She showed no signs of emotion. He finished eating and turned off the broadcast. He knew they had to address the issue now rather than later. If his career meant she would be miserable and suffer, then he would gladly give it up. He wanted her, and he wanted her to be happy. "Tusia," he began, not certain how to proceed. "I have made many mistakes over the years, all of them because of my career. I have no right to expect you to love me anymore, or ever again. But I must let you know that my feelings for you are so strong that it causes me pain. I love you and I want you back in my life. If that means I lose my career, then I don't care." He studied her for signs of emotion, but she sat quietly, neither accepting nor rejecting what he'd said. He didn't care which way it went. He just needed to say it. "I know you are making a sacrifice for me that causes you great pain, and I cannot accept that. If my career is going to cause you to suffer, then damn my career. Let the Emperor blow up the planet for all I care. I want you back in my life. I want to make up for all those years I neglected you, even if it takes the rest of my life." He paused, seeing no emotion on her face. Well, it was a gamble, but one he had to take. He continued, "Do not stay with me if you cannot love me or forgive me or be a real part of my life. Do not stay because of your family or my career or because of your reputation. Stay because you have feelings for me and want to give me a chance to earn back your heart and your love. I don't care about my career, Tusia. I only care about you." The speech had a familiar ring to it. It was the emotional speech he had wanted to tell Linda before he was unfairly ripped away. Like Tusia, Linda had suffered because of Tyler's career. He had always put work before her, and she too had put herself last, sacrificing a family for the love she held for Tyler. He felt calm before the storm. 31. Pain and guilt from the memory, and looked to Tusia as a way to wash that away. How much was residual memories of the admirals, and how much was Tyler? He didn't know, or care. It was a great relief to have finally said it. Tusia remained motionless, nothing revealing her feelings. He waited patiently, fearing she would reject him while emotions swelled in his heart, filling his stomach with a hollow ache. He slid out of his chair and knelt before her on the ground, gently grasping one of her hands as he bowed his head. Her hand trembled, the only sign of emotion. "I vow to you right now, right here, on my family's ancestral estate, I will never do anything to hurt you again. I will spend my remaining days doing whatever I can to regain your trust, your love, and your respect. Please stay with me because you want to, Tusia. Stay because you want us to be together, as a family." Well, there it was. He'd put his heart on his sleeve and could only wait to see what she would do with it. Slowly, she removed her hand from his and cupped his chin gently, lifting his face. She wore a small, tight smile, and tears welled in both eyes. "Love was never in doubt, Naylan. I have always loved you, and always will. We grew so far apart during these long years that the pain from those wounds are still fresh." She wiped her eyes before continuing. "I kidded myself into taking this role because of my family, my pride, and my fear. But inside, I wanted to believe you'd changed. When you woke and I saw you for the first time in the hospital, I had not been prepared for the obvious feelings you displayed. I didn't know how to respond, so I shut you out." She wiped her eyes and took a sip of tea to help steel her resolve. "My desire to end our marriage was strong, even after that first visit. But something about you evoked strong memories and feelings that I had buried long ago. When I received all your letters and messages, the feelings they expressed only confused me. Again, I couldn't respond. She wiped tears and gestured to Tyler's chair. "Please, Nayland, sit." He rose from his knees and sat in the chair, waiting for her to finish, hope building with her words. "When Marshal Sliss contacted me about 3 weeks ago, I was dubious about what he had suggested. It took me an entire week to respond, much to the Marshal's distress, I'm sure. However, the more I thought about it, the more I had to know whether your feelings were sincere and genuine. In the guise of 132, Admiral's ghost helping your career and my family, I accepted the Marshal's offer to help." She sipped, obviously gaining resolve from the stimulant. "Seeing you now and hearing your words." She broke down, unable to control her emotions. Tyler leaned forward and took her hand, trying to comfort her. She trembled from his touch, almost pulling away before grasping him for support. "I see and feel a change in you that I thought could never happen. I do want to be with you, Nayland. I really do." She completely broke down, and Tyler got up to comfort her. She grabbed his waist as he wrapped his arms around her. He felt his own emotions well up and barely held back tears. It wouldn't do to have the Admiral crying, although that was what Tyler felt like doing. "I know it will take time, Tusia, but we can make this work. We can find each other once more and be the family we deserve," she sobbed gently. He didn't know how it would work, but he had a chance to right so many wrongs. Perhaps being the Admiral wouldn't be as bad as he first imagined. Perhaps the complex life of a powerful man would finally give Tyler something he never had: a family. It took time for both to compose themselves before Tyler canceled his meetings for the day. Marshal Sliss protested until he learned the Admiral and his wife would be inspecting the grounds of their estate. At that point, the Marshal backed down, wishing them well. He and Tusia took ground transport down to tour their estate with the caretaker and chief operator of the winery. Throughout the tour, they held hands, embraced warmly, and stared into each other's eyes. As far as Tyler was concerned, this was a date he would never forget. He sensed Tusia felt the same, despite being apprehensive about showing affection. They didn't say much, but held excited discussions with various staff throughout the winery. The chief operator, Kiran Oslan, was the 10th generation caretaker of the estate's winery. The Admiral held no memory of him, but did remember the man's father and grandfather. Kiran informed them he'd taken over operations after his father had suffered health problems 5 years earlier. And although Kiran Kam, before the storm, 133 was the youngest in his line, the winery had vastly improved under his tenure. Kiran was excited to show them the awards and accolades the winery had received over the last 2 of their finest years. According to Kiran, this year's harvest was looking even better, and he assured Tyler they would receive several hundred cases for the estate's cellar. Kiran was affable and talkative, and both Tyler and Tusia were able to escape from their emotional meeting from earlier. Although the Admiral rarely showed interest in his family's wine production, Tyler was more than pleased to have inherited such a wonderful operation. He was fascinated by the process that created the wines, and Kiran's intense passion for the business was infectious. It was one of the best times Tusia and the Admiral could remember. They felt like an old couple, familiar and warm, while excited as if on a first date. Since becoming Onyalam, Tyler had never felt so happy. He wished the day would go on forever. After the tour, they ate lunch at the winery before heading back to the palace, where the Marshal and staff had prepared an incredible dinner just for the 2 of them. They both laughed at the Marshal's obvious desire to foster their newfound relationship, but both accepted it graciously. They finally parted, retiring to separate rooms to bathe and dress for the romantic evening. Tyler donned the Admiral's finest formal uniform while Toosia dressed in an elegant gown of dark blue. The gown clung to her body, outlining the shape beneath. It was breathtaking, and Tyler showed his approval with pulses of light flickering across his face. When they both met in the dining room, Tyler helped Toosia into her chair, lightly kissing her cheek before taking his own seat. The kitchen staff did not disappoint, as they were lavished with multiple courses of exquisite foods from all over the planet. With each course, samples of the estate's best wines were served at the perfect temperature. Tyler felt like a king. Several hours later, the dinner concluded, and Tyler excused the staff so he and Toosia could retire to the couch in front of the large fireplace. The fire burned brightly, filling the room with a dancing glow of yellow gold. Toosia, barefoot, stretched her legs out along the couch, settling into Tyler's arms. The moment was peaceful, and so happy after the day they'd enjoyed. He gently caressed the skin of her arm, his hands moving gently across her body. Feeling familiar curves, he longed 134. Admiral's ghost explore. He felt hot and excited as colors flash across her exposed skin. He wanted to take her, to make love to her like the dream from the night before. But he held back. He didn't want to ruin the road to reconciliation by rushing into the physical part of the relationship. Although he sensed she wanted to make love, she held back, tentative in the renewal of their emotions. They held each other well into the night, both succumbing to sleep by the warmth of the fire. Tyler woke late in the night, only embers glowing softly. Tyler noted one of the staff had placed a blanket over Toosia as she lay curled up with her head on his lap. She looked peaceful, and he didn't want to disturb her. They'd both drank a lot of wine that day, and though Tyler was used to it, she probably wasn't. He slipped out from underneath her and stood up. He was stiff, but felt good for sleeping upright on the couch. She didn't stir from his movement, so he gently shook her, trying to wake her. She rolled over and continued to sleep. He didn't want to leave her on the couch, so he wrapped her in the blanket and carried her back to her room. She was light in his arms and didn't wake as they made their way to her quarters. He put her in bed, removing her gown and covering her with sheets. She rolled from him towards the center of the bed. Quietly, he left her room and headed to his own. He couldn't remember when he had ever felt this good without being really euphoric state. The wine helped, but the feelings of love he felt for Toosia were more powerful than any substances he'd tried before. He felt a fearful elation from the emotions. As he lay back to sleep, he could almost feel her against his body. He imagined her naked skin caressing his, both dancing with the colored lights of arousal. As his fantasy grew, the wine sent him into a peaceful sleep. Yuso, the last week in Tuland with Toosia, prepared Tyler for the return to the capital. Not only was the relationship rekindled, but he found her counsel invaluable in preparing him for the rigors of the political arena. As Supreme Commander of Pulto forces, the Admiral had spent a great deal of time in Yuso. However, in that capacity, he rarely felt compelled to enter the political ring. His military record was sufficient to maintain his position within the hierarchy. Only now, on the verge of losing that position, did politics become a necessity. Marshal Sliss's spies confirmed their suspicions about the Emperor and Vice Admiral Thiessen. Thiessen had convinced the Emperor that his battle plan would work, so both ignored the perils as they quickly embarked down the dangerous path. They both knew Admiral Oslu's opposition to the plan, so they had much to lose by his return. After the previous defeat, neither wanted an internal power struggle to disrupt the progress of the war. Tyler didn't want the power struggle either, but he couldn't sit by as they led Pulto to its destruction. He had to play the only card he had, that of national hero. They knew neither the Vice Admiral nor the Emperor would move against them openly, so their arrival and the planned press conference was not a surprise. Nonetheless, Marshal Slice was concerned about other ways they could affect the return. Ultimately, the Emperor dictated who was in power, so they needed to convince the press and the public that he was still the 136 Admiral's ghost right man for the job. Otherwise, the Emperor could keep him suspended, pending his full recovery. All these possibilities haunted Tyler as they traveled the final distance to the city in an elegant ground vehicle. Tyler thought of it as a limo, but it dwarfed any he had seen before. This vehicle was 100 feet long and 20 feet wide. It took up nearly 2 lanes, requiring an elaborate escort to clear the path. Within this monstrous interior, most of the Admiral's senior staff rode contentedly, working on the press conference that would soon be launched. The rear compartment was reserved for the Admiral, and Tyler rode with Tuzia, Marshal Slice, and the twin aides, Corin and Beelan. As usual, the junior officers were lost in their communication devices, coordinating everything for the arrival. 2 others rode in the compartment, and Tyler thought their inclusion unusual. At the Marshal's insistence, 2 security personnel rode disguised as aides. They were more than imposing, and Tuzia kept eyeing them distrustfully. Since Pulto had been united, there had never been an assassination attempt on any person of significant power, especially a national hero. Tyler thought precaution was overkill, but the Marshal had insisted. In his own words, "We cannot underestimate the threat you pose to the Emperor and his plans." Tyler still thought it unnecessary, but he had to trust his most valuable advisor. The Marshal introduced them as Officers Perrin and Dieti, but Tyler didn't want to make their acquaintance. He figured they probably weren't real names anyway. The Marshal assured Tyler the men had been recruited from top commando units, created to infiltrate and sabotage key enemy installations in the asteroid belt. The Admiral had never liked their methods, but he couldn't deny their effectiveness. More than once he'd relied on their abilities to disable strategic defense systems so that his plans could be carried out. They were highly effective, but amoral and opaque. Only the Marshal had detailed information on their activities, and he alone commanded them. Not even Vice Admiral Thiessen had access to their operations. Secrecy was a top priority when the units were formed. Other than being imposing, both looked the part of a military bureaucrat. They wore simple single suits with the official aid insignias on each lapel. Neither carried visible weapons, but the USO 137 Marshal assured Tyler they were lethal if needed and capable of handling nearly every situation. Unlike Tuzia, the 2 men didn't bother Tyler. The only thing unnerving was the way they looked straight into your eyes while talking. Their stare was penetrating, measuring, and assessing everything and everyone around them. It was disconcerting, but then Tyler had never met anyone with that kind of cold, measured intensity. Not even the tense underworld of substances trafficking possessed people like them. Tyler watched each as they stared out the windows on either side of the compartment. The windows were tinted, so nothing was visible from the outside. Despite the darkened panes, Tyler felt certain the men saw everything that was going on. Tyler glanced out the right side window as they went by a congregation of people on the side of the road outside the downtown district of Yuso. The congregation was large, but dwarfed by the immensity of the capital city. Skyscrapers rose thousands of feet into the sky, blotting out clouds as the car entered the chasms of Pulto's greatest achievement. Speeding by the onlookers, Tyler spotted signs held up that welcomed the Admiral back to duty. They wished him and his wife well. Tyler knew the marshal had organized the congregation and made sure the news networks picked up on it. The marshal spent big on their return, and Tyler hoped it would pay off. The car continued towards the center of the city and the seat of power. The streets were shadowed in darkness from the tall buildings, but lights lining the streets filled it with a dim twilight, reminiscent of Las Vegas at night. The city didn't look like Vegas. Nothing on the Strip had been this big. Tyler estimated the average building to be hundreds of floors tall, and as he stared into the small spaces between them, he saw many were interconnected by walkways and transportation systems, many stories overhead. It was likely most never made it to street level, except when leaving the city. He spotted vehicles flying overhead as their own car moved along the dark roadway. From the Admiral's memories, he could pull up a lot of detail about Yuso. Like most large urban centers, this one was not without its problems and vices. Gambling, illicit substances, and sex were a mainstay in the city. The criminal elements walked side by side with the most powerful people on the planet. It was rumored the Emperor allowed this, maybe even encouraging it. 138. Admiral's Ghost. Tyler didn't understand why, but the Marshal confided the best way to maintain control and power was to make your enemies your allies. The criminal element supported the Emperor because he looked the other way. Within reason, this was where Tyler and the Admiral's political inexperience was a glaring weakness. He knew Raoul had several political and law enforcement connections, but the risk of exposure and arrest were a constant threat. This was why Tyler needed Tusia. She had spent most of her life in Yuso. Although she never aspired to politics, she had moved within the political inner circles because of her father's position on the council. She understood trade-offs, negotiations, and the common wrangling that were at the heart of Pulto politics. She knew the vast connections each politician had and where their allegiance lay. Surprisingly, it was not always with the Emperor. With her assistance, they hoped to forge the relationships that would bring public support to the Admiral's side and ensure his return to command. The Emperor either controlled or swayed most of the counselors, but it was his spies within the Supreme Council that were the real concern. It was virtually impossible to do anything without the Emperor finding out about it. Many counselors were brought down because of their impropriety and lack of caution. Everyone understood the Emperor was not above using criminal connections to discredit or destroy unruly counselors. Usually the counselors themselves caused the downfall by succumbing to greed and corruption. This was the place most people on Pulto knew nothing about, the place where decisions were made affecting their lives, though not always open in a public forum. Tyler had to be careful. He was out of his league and would have to rely upon those around him to successfully navigate. Fortunately, once in command, he could leave the city and run the war from afar. He hoped that would happen. A part of him wanted to quit being the Admiral and retire to Tuland, with Tusia by his side. Maybe someday. Tyler was blinded by light as they broke through the maze into blue sky above the center of the city. The seat of power was within a 5-square-mile area, surrounded by the artificial jungle of buildings they'd passed through. The incongruity was stunning, and Tyler could only compare it to Central Park in New York City, Yuso 139. The area was composed of what Tyler could only call grass. He didn't think it was grass, but the green color looked like a lawn. According to the Admiral's memories, the lawn was formed by a plant that maintained a consistent height of 6 inches. The plant contained a very sticky substance that was nearly impossible to remove and was intended as protection from ground attacks or intruders not authorized within the grounds. Beyond the protective lawn, Tyler saw a maze of complexes that held the power of the planet. It was built like a wheel with the Emperor's palace at the hub, and spokes extending out towards the other government facilities. Surrounding the palace at the end of each spoke was the Supreme Council, the Ministry of Justice, the Supreme Military Command, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Information, and the Ministry of Government Affairs. Combined, this was the power of Pulto. This was the most defended parcel of land on the planet, even though it appeared unguarded. The enormous city surrounding it was the first line of defense against land and air attack. Hidden within the jungle of skyscrapers, troops were stationed with particle cannons to protect the capital. The city at its thinnest point was 10 miles wide, and the buildings provided an excellent barrier to ground assault. Tyler didn't think such an assault would ever be launched on the city, but nonetheless, it was protected from that one in a million chance. The enormity boggled Tyler's mind, even coming from Los Angeles. At least in Los Angeles, you could occasionally see sky when the smog was low. The city was spread out, not up like Yuso. Even pictures of New York didn't compare with the size and scope of this city. The fleet had ships that could rival the city in size, but to see it in the open like this was simply amazing. Inside a ship, it was difficult to see its true size. Tyler watched as the cityscape disappeared behind the tunneled entrance, burrowed beneath the government complex. Once inside, each vehicle came under the control of the security forces guarding the complex. The maze of roadways could be dynamically changed or blocked, using a sophisticated system that manipulated walls, roads, and ceilings. Only the security forces knew the constantly changing layouts. That was why all vehicles were remotely driven through the 140 Admiral's Ghost complex. As they continued through the dimly lit tunnels, there was nothing to see. The Admiral's memories confirmed the majority of the government operated in buildings predominantly below ground level. The maze they drove through could easily take them further underneath the complex. Unfortunately, the occupants of the vehicles couldn't tell. The complex was submerged nearly 1,000 feet below the planet's surface, a fact that wasn't publicized. The entire complex was self-sufficient, with thermal power sources, underground food production, water treatment, and waste disposal. After the missile attacks early in the war, the Emperor ordered the massive complex built to withstand another such attack. Unfortunately, the latest in modern missile technology had recently been shown capable of destroying most of the complex with a direct hit. Few in the government knew this except the Imperial Palace, the intelligence community, and the military. Without the defense grid surrounding the planet, they were vulnerable. Fortunately, so was Krildon. After what seemed an interminable drive through the underground maze, they came to the center of the complex. Nearly 300 feet below ground, the complex opened onto what could only be called a hidden paradise. An enormous cavern was constructed to house the government buildings from above. Using artificial light, a lush landscape with trees, gardens, lawns, and walkways spread out within the cavern. Everywhere Tyler looked, people sat in groups, walked between buildings, or lounged on the lush lawns. It was an incredible sight, and the Admiral's memories had done it little justice. Tyler carefully shielded his surprise and amazement from the others. To the Admiral, this would have been nothing new, but to Tyler, it was captivating, and he decided he had to make some comment on what he saw. After my time in the hospital, I have begun to realize how beautiful this world is. Perhaps for the first time in my life, I realize what a treasure I have pledged my life to protect. This complex is truly a wonderful creation so far underground. No one commented on his remark, but Tosia and the marshal gave him a curious look before staring out the window he seemed so enthralled by. Their reactions did not indicate they saw the same beauty, and Tyler thought it was a pity to be so immune to something so grand. Then again, he was seeing it for the first time. USO 141. They drove through the complex towards the Supreme Military Command building. Out in front, a large group of government officials and press waited patiently for their arrival. Like clockwork, everything was prepared. He steeled himself for the press conference and felt confident in his knowledge and ability to handle it. He was, after all, the national hero. That put him above everyone else, and he needed to act the part. The Marshal, Tosia, and his staff had done a tremendous job coaching him, but now all that preparation would be put to the test. He watched as their cavalcade pulled directly in front of the building by a large platform erected on the front steps. On the platform, senior military officials and bureaucrats sat patiently waiting. At the front, a large array of microphones and small cameras stood ready to mark the historical event by transmitting it throughout the empire. The scope would only be eclipsed by an imperial speech by the emperor himself. Tyler felt the beginnings of butterflies. Although it was underground, the transmission would reach nearly every home and business on Poolto. It would even be transmitted to all the colonies controlled by Poolto, and some that were not. The Krildan military would jam all broadcasts reaching their possessions, but that didn't matter. This event was for Poolto only. The vehicle came to a stop, and the marshal and his aides quickly departed to ensure everything was ready. While Tyler and Tosia waited, she grabbed his hand, squeezing it gently. "I wanted to let you know that it will be very busy for the next few months," she said, "and I want you to know how special this last week has been." She looked so beautiful and yet fragile, but she would provide the strength he needed to succeed here. It was hard to believe she was capable, as she appeared vulnerable with emotions barely held in check. She kissed him on the cheek before continuing, "I will be in and out of your life during this time, but you will not be out of my heart. I will provide you the best counsel I can, and I will comfort you when we are together." She paused briefly, staring out at the throng waiting for their embarkation. "You have changed, Naylin, and I suppose I have too. I know we are just beginning to discover one another again, and I don't want all of 142 Admiral's Ghost this to get in the way. I promise I will not let it, if you promise me the same." He looked into her eyes and felt a lump in his throat. This was the one thing he feared about his fight to regain power. At what cost would this last effort take on his personal life? He knew he must do everything he could to preserve what they had begun. "I won't let this ruin what we've regained. I will not make the same mistakes." He paused, leaning over and kissing her on the lips. As they separated, he wiped a small tear from her eye. "I love you, Tosia, and I will not let you go." "I love you too, Naylin." She wiped her eyes and smoothed her gown. "Let's show them what force a united Oslu family can wield." Tyler smiled and signaled they were ready. The aide opened the door to the crowd, erupting in a deafening roar. There were several hundred spectators at the event, but the sound was like thousands. Tyler stepped out of the vehicle and turned to assist Tosia. Hand in hand, they walked towards the platform, the crowd urging them with applause and shouts of encouragement. They stopped amid the noise, holding hands together, raised in an acknowledgement of the warm reception they'd been provided. This made the crowd roar even louder, and many of the security forces holding them back struggled to contain the excitement. Tyler had never experienced anything like this, and he was more than concerned for their safety. Crowds could get out of control, even small ones. Still, these were government workers, and he doubted they would incite a riot within the confines of the cavern. He wanted to avoid problems, so he broke with their script and walked with Tusia towards the crowd. He held out his hands and shook as many as were offered, while they walked down the doses. It may have been out of character for the Admiral, but Tyler didn't care. The people wanted their national hero back, and Tyler noted the cameras on the platform turned towards him as he made his way down the line. It took nearly 15 minutes to complete the mental journey, and more than once, the doses almost broke. However, after the greeting, the crowd settled down as Tyler and Tusia made their way to the large platform. He passed the marshal as he dropped Tusia off. Noting the marshal gave him a small look of disapproval. USO 143. It didn't matter. It had calmed the crowd and would be viewed across the planet. Overt connections with the people went a long way politically. Even a non-politician like Tyler knew that. Upon his entrance onto the platform, everyone stood and clapped in unison. He made his way down the line of dignitaries and military leaders, shaking hands and commenting on how good it was to be back to see them. The Admiral's memory provided a detailed biography of everyone he met, so it was easy to make the necessary small talk. Once the greetings were over, he made his way to the front of the platform where Vice Admiral Thiessen waited. They briefly shook hands, both wearing smiles for the cameras. Tyler stood back, while the Vice Admiral introduced him to the waiting public. All along the front of the platform, cameras lit up as live feeds were shot across the Pool-2 Empire. It made Tyler a little giddy when he thought about how many would be watching. He watched the Vice Admiral carefully as the man delivered the welcome speech. "It is with the greatest pleasure and greatest honor that I am able to welcome back to this great city the planet's most beloved hero, Admiral Nayland Oslu." The Vice Admiral applauded as he turned to face Tyler with a genuine smile. Tyler knew the script, so he bowed and humbly shook off the admiration and accolades inherent in the introduction. The applause went on for several minutes before the Vice Admiral spoke again. "Our thoughts and hopes have been with the Admiral during his difficult recovery, and we all longed for the day when he could stand here once again, a symbol of what this world has to offer, a man whose courage and devotion is only equaled by his exemplary service." The crowd erupted into a long applause. Difficult recovery, symbol. Tyler glimpsed the thrust of their attack. They wanted to show him as someone who barely survived and may not yet be recovered. The Vice Admiral well knew of his recovery and the lack of difficulty. He had drawn the doses in the sand. The crowd died down, and the Vice Admiral continued, recounting past battles the Admiral had won. Always he referred to the past, speaking in past tense, as though the Admiral's career were over. Thiessen was crafty. Tyler had to give him that. But Tyler, 144 Admiral's ghost, also knew this speech had been prepared with the assistance of the Emperor's staff. He knew they would be working together. That was fine. They, too, had prepared a marvelous speech, and since it would be the last one delivered, it would have the greatest impact. He brought his attention back to the Vice Admiral as the key word signaled the speech was nearing the end. "Today, nothing is certain, and we are still at war. The Admiral's counsel and experience will yet help us through these difficult times." Counsel? Tyler could barely contain himself as he waited for Thiessen to finish. He trusted his speech would shock everyone and signal his intent to become the supreme military commander once again. "Ladies and gentlemen, May I please introduce to you one of the most honorable and heroic men of our time, Admiral Nayland Oslu. The Vice Admiral stepped back from the podium and applauded as Tyler stepped forward. This renewed the crowd's efforts with whistles and shouting. Tyler played the moment brilliantly, letting it go on as long as the crowd would support it. He waved to the crowd, to the cameras, and most importantly, to the people watching at home. Difficult recovery. Just wait. They'd worked hard on the speech, and the first thing they had to do was reaffirm their allegiance to the Emperor. This would rally the crowd around both of them, hiding the division that now existed. They must maintain the illusion of a unified leadership, a common government working towards a common cause. That was how they would win the support. Tyler stood silently, waiting for the crowd to settle down. Those on the platform took their seats as the noise finally subsided. Thank you, Vice Admiral Thiessen. Your exceptional leadership has been greatly appreciated during my absence. We are indebted to your service and your support. Let him chew on that. Please, a round of applause to show our great appreciation to the Vice Admiral. Tyler led the applause as he turned to the Vice Admiral, all smiles and goodwill. The crowd followed his lead. He turned back to face the cameras. You have all graciously welcomed me back, and for that, I am grateful, but it is not I who should be honored here today. No, the one we should honor is the one who continues to stand for Poulto in this grave time of crisis. It is the man for whom I have pledged my undying allegiance, and you so 145 offer my greatest respect. He alone has led our great peoples forward into the future, a future I have the utmost confidence he will deliver to us with victory and everlasting peace. That man is our great and magnificent Emperor, Halin Yuso Vofsoth, a man who is descended from the greatest men our planet has ever known. With that, Tyler moved back from the podium and looked upward towards the Imperial Palace at the center of the complex. Raising his hand, he saluted the Emperor's palace, a gesture he was certain the Emperor was watching from within. Following his lead, everyone on the platform turned towards the palace and saluted gracefully. Tyler finished and returned to the podium. Let's hear a great cheer for our Emperor, defender of Poulto, leader to all, and the man for whom we all owe our greatest debt of gratitude. The crowd responded with a generous cheer and applause as they all turned towards the palace. To the Emperor! He shouted. Tyler joined the applause and let it last as long as possible. He had thrown down the gauntlet, and now the Emperor would have to tread carefully. Finally, the crowd subsided and returned their attention to Tyler. He had his pleasantries out of the way and was ready to deliver the speech they had prepared. He had shown the public a united government, and now he would solidify that image further. He waited until there was absolute quiet before beginning. All the cameras were pointed at him as he addressed every citizen of Poulto. People of Poulto, it is with grave concern that we face one of our most pivotal moments in history. Not since the late great Emperor Yuso united our planet and brought peace to our warring peoples have we had such a need for a united Poulto. Our enemy is weakened, and we stand on the brink of an age where this war may be won. He waited for the applause to quiet before continuing. I have their attention now. As a student of history, and in particular, military history, I see this day as a day not unlike that faced by one of my ancestors during the great campaign that won them the power to govern 146 admirals ghost themselves, free of the tyranny they had endured for so many millennia. There was no telling how many remembered that history. Fortunately, those that had ruled with tyranny were long out of power. Tyler had chosen the memory just for that reason. No need to open old wounds. My ancestor had won a great battle against his enemy and stood on the brink of victory. It was at that time that everyone around him called for a final push, a blow to their enemy when they were at their weakest. But it was at that very moment that my ancestor chose to ignore their advice, stepping back to survey the situation before leaping into battle. Let that sink in. Do you hear, Emperor? This pause in the campaign nearly caused a rebellion within his ranks, but his resolve and leadership held them united. That moment in their history, that moment when he rejected the cry for vengeance, that moment when victory was so close they could almost touch it, that was the moment when his decision turned the tides of war and determined their fate forever. A fate that ultimately brought them victory. He surveyed the crowd, watching as his speech held them captivated. He could almost hear their thoughts. What happened? Why did he wait? How did they win? Unbeknownst to my ancestor or his advisors, the enemy, in a last-ditch effort to win, had planned a counterattack that would have caught my ancestors off guard and likely turned the tide of the war. Not only would their forces have been severely incapacitated, but they would have lost much of their land and its people. In the heady aftermath of a great victory lay the seeds of their greatest defeat. In their haste to end the war, they would have committed their troops to an action that would have placed them in peril, a peril they had no way of knowing or understanding. Ah, look at them waiting to hear how it went. I have them now. My ancestor knew only one thing. He knew that his enemy could not and should not be underestimated. Like a cornered beast, he knew the enemy would fight a last, desperate fight, one that would destroy them all and take hundreds of years to recover. He knew he couldn't move until the enemy showed their hand, until he had solid intelligence on their actions. He knew his duty was to defend his people first and win the war second. He knew a USO 147 victorious war could not be won at the expense of the land and the people for whom it was fought. See Vice Admiral Thiessen. There is precedence in caution. My ancestor understood that the enemy needed time to rebuild their forces to recover from the losses they had suffered. It was from this fact that he knew they had time to wait, to learn, and to plan. In the months after their great battle, they watched. It was in this time of patient planning and vigilance that they uncovered their enemy's final gasp. He paused, letting the tension build. Okay, time to let them in on it. It was during this pause that they discovered the enemy had created biological and chemical weapons placed in key regions where food production and water supplies were critical. Large city centers were booby-trapped. The network was large, secret, and poised to be unleashed. The enemy's plan was simple. When my ancestor committed the remaining troops to an epic battle, a battle the enemy was certain to lose, the network of weapons would be released, destroying the land and the people. What did the enemy have to lose? They were defeated and nearly destroyed. Why not take their enemy down with them? He let the horror of the potential losses they would have suffered sink in. He wondered how the Emperor was reacting from his palace. By now, the Emperor's staff had undoubtedly looked up the historical accuracy of what Tyler was recounting. Let them look. It all was true. Instead of heeding the advice of those wanting a massive battle to conquer the enemy, my ancestor chose to negotiate peace. The enemy didn't realize he had discovered their plot, and that gave him the edge he needed in the negotiations. You see, instead of cornering them, he chose to give them a way out, a way that would not destroy them both. Instead, he gave his people the freedom they deserved, while preserving the dignity of those that had ruled them. The peace lasted nearly 1,000 years. Think about that. It was good to remind them of their admiral's historical past and the ancestors of power. Peace. Is it worth negotiating for? Can we put down the years of fighting and hatred? Probably not. But it was time to sow the seeds anyway. Considering the Admiral's father's position at the outset of the war, Tyler was walking a fine line between leadership and betrayal. The crowd looked uncertain and a little shocked. 148. Admiral's ghost. Am I proposing that we negotiate a peace with Krildon? No. I am proposing that we currently stand on the same pinnacle of our destiny that my ancestor did, and like him, we must bide our time and plan the strategy that will finally win this war and bring everlasting peace we all want and deserve. That did it. The crowd erupted into a huge applause. That was what they expected from their national hero. I realize we have all suffered, and we have all lost during this great conflict. I know that we cannot endure this conflict forever. But I also know the strength of Poulto lies in its people and in its wisdom to do the right thing, even in the face of uncertainty, vengeance, or fear. He watched the faces in the crowd, staring at their hero, looking for leadership and certainty. He turned it up a notch, unleashing the full Admiral. We will not let our emotions dictate our actions. We will not let our cry for vengeance rule our wisdom. We will not let our excitement of a battle won blind our mission. No, we will take this time to decide our path, defend our planet, and plot the victory over our enemies. This was it, the finale. He had them in the palm of his hands. A united Poulto is a strong and wise Poulto. We will not let our actions destroy all that we have fought for. We will not sit idle, nor will we rush into an action that is rash and reckless. We will learn our enemies' weaknesses, learn how to defeat them, make our actions and our lives count in this war. A united Poulto cannot be defeated. No, I say we cannot be defeated. We will let wisdom guide our actions and chart our destiny, and God willings, we will win this war and vanquish our enemies. With that, he pounded his fist on the podium to emphasize his resolve. He thought it was a rather great speech, but the crowd stood motionless. Were they shocked? He couldn't tell. The silence seemed to last forever, and Tyler began to grow concerned. Finally, the marshal rose from his seat behind Tyler and began to applaud. That was enough to move them all into action. Everyone rose and applauded. The applause and the cheering became deafening. That was more like it. Tyler felt in control again. Now they would have to wait for the post-speech analyses and polls to come in to see how they had really done. All that was left was to announce his intentions to return to duty as Supreme Commander. He would allow time for the USO 149 transition, but he wouldn't allow an opening to be denied. They all knew that much of their campaign was being fought right here and right now. The crowd grew quiet, waiting for their hero. Tyler moved back to the podium. A united Poulto, he began. A Poulto, where we all can make a difference in the war. I am but one man among billions, and I cannot win this war alone. I will continue to work hard as your Supreme Commander, and I will work united with the Emperor and our Supreme Council to plot our course. My staff and I will work in concert with Vice Admiral Thiessen to make our transition to full duty swift and smooth. During this transition, I will spend a great deal of time working with the Emperor and the Council. Meanwhile, Vice Admiral Thiessen will continue in his role as Supreme Commander until the transition is complete. We estimate about 2 months to complete the transition. Now, I understand we will open this up to questions from the press. While the press corps moved into position at the base of the platform and set up their equipment, Tyler moved back on the platform and shook hands with the Vice Admiral and many of the senior military personnel. The Marshal assured him that nearly all of the senior military staff were behind him 100%. After all, most had served with the Admiral in one battle or another and owed him their lives. That was a great weakness in the Vice Admiral's position. He held little power within the military ranks, and therefore had to rely on the Emperor to retain his position. Fat chance if the public rallied behind the Admiral. He had more than emphasized the need for a united Poulto, so neither the Vice Admiral nor the Emperor could openly deny him. No, Tyler figured they would have to look for other means to keep him down. Tyler hoped they would not find it. He made his way towards the Marshal and Tuzia. He shook the Marshal's hand, but saw a look of concern on the man's face. "What is it, Gulen? Did I miss something in the speech?" he asked. No, Admiral, you said it perfectly as rehearsed." "Then what is it? You look concerned." Tuzia stepped into the conversation. "It wasn't what you didn't say, Naylan. It was what you added." She, too, had a look of concern on her face. Wafdi Admiral's ghost. "Fine. What did I add? Don't keep me in suspense." Tuzia looked at the Marshal, who simply shrugged. She turned back to Tyler. "That piece at the end of the speech, when you said, 'God willing,' that was not in the speech we practiced." She said it calmly, and Tyler couldn't figure out where the problem was. Damn, it slipped out again. He grew angry with himself. "I understand, Naylan, but why did you say it?" She still looked concerned. "Have you recently found religion?" "What? Me find religion? You know me better than that. It's just a manner of speech, a phrase. No one believes it." He couldn't believe they were taking it this way. He knew religion still existed on the planet, but only a small remnant of people believed it. Surely his comment would not be taken seriously. "Well, manner of speech or not, the only people who say such things are zealots, and they scare the rest of us." She didn't look pleased, and that bothered Tyler. The Marshal broke in. "Admiral, we designed this speech specifically to ally yourself with the Emperor and his power, but your slip of the tongue may have destroyed all that. The Emperor has, on many occasions, denounced the religious factions of this world as crackpots and kooks. Now, you may have inadvertently aligned yourself with those same crackpots, as well as the Emperor. It is a very dangerous thing you have done." Well, there it was, back in the capital for less than an hour, and Tyler already destroyed everything they had come to do. "I told you I should have handled this. You don't have the experience to take on this role, but I do." Tyler ignored Adani's remark and forced him back into the depths. He thought about the press conference and dreaded the question that were sure to be asked. He grabbed Tuzia's hand and held it firmly. "I am truly sorry, Tuzia. It just came out. Don't worry, Naylan. We can still win this fight. It will just be a little harder." He heard confidence, but he wasn't sure he believed it. They were ready to move to the podium when the Marshal held up his hand for them to wait while he conferred with Officer Koren. Apparently, the young officer had received news through his communication device. Uzo 151. Tyler couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could imagine what it was about. The Marshal finished with Koren and walked to Tyler. "Well, the preliminary network analysis of your speech has already stirred controversy about your religious comment. They are buzzing with the story and what it might represent." The Marshal looked past the Admiral and held up a finger to signal the delay of the press conference. He leaned in towards both of them and talked low. "We may be able to prevent this from becoming anything substantial, but we must be careful with the press questions." He looked around before continuing, stopping when he spotted Vice Admiral Thiessen across the platform. The man stared at them with a grin. He, too, had heard the early press reports. "Okay, look, The rest of the speech was fantastic, and we probably got most of the planet on our side. However, we must discount this religious thing immediately. Now, Admiral, we can't let anyone think this bothers us. We must play it off as nothing, so don't bring it up until the press does. Then, deny it without a second thought, casual and easygoing. Don't fight, antagonize, or argue the point with the press. Remember, this is still being broadcast to all of Poolto. Don't worry, Marshal. I won't make another mistake. Good. We can downplay this and still win the support we need. After all, you have pledged your support for the Emperor, so no one can question you on that. Tyler shook his head and moved to the podium with Tuzia at his side. This, too, was prearranged to show the support he had within his own family. Everyone knew her father was a counselor, and that would go a long way in their efforts. The press was ready, so Tyler moved into position to field questions. He started with the reporter on the far left, signaling for the first question. Thankfully, the reporter was on their side and had a pre-planned set of questions to ask. Admiral, there has been great speculation on your remarkable recovery. Can you please tell us how that went? Certainly. It went very well. In fact, the doctors admitted they had never seen someone recover so quickly. That much was true. He made sure he didn't add how the doctors were confused by his rapid progress. Fortunately, I am fully recovered and ready to resume duties. 152. Admiral's Ghost. Excellent, sir. We are all very glad to have you back. Can you tell us anything about the extent of your injuries? This question was also planned. This may not be the right forum for those kinds of detail, which is why my staff prepared a release for each of you containing the full report and doctors' comments about both my injuries and my recovery. Thank you, sir. Nayland went in order, selecting the next reporter. Tuzia squeezed his hand, their signal for a reporter known to be under the influence of the Emperor. Tyler was certain he would jump on the religious comments. Admiral, sir, over the years we have not seen you and your lovely wife together very often. It is truly wonderful to see her here today. Over those many years, many concerns have been voiced about your marriage. Am I to now assume there are no problems? Good. They had prepared for this question. You assume correctly. There are no problems with our marriage. Here was their opportunity to connect with the rest of the population. Like many on Poolto, our lives have been impacted by the war. My duties have not always afforded me the family life I would have chosen. However, my wife, selfless and sacrificing, has stood by me through these difficult times. It is a sacrifice we gladly make if it helps the war effort. Touché. Let them try and analyze that one. The Emperor would not believe it, but the public would. Excellent, sir. We look forward to seeing more of both of you while you are in Yuso. The reporter appeared confounded. My last question, sir. This was it. Tyler was certain. Will both of you be attending the Imperial Ball? The questions wasn't expected, and Tyler tried to understand why it was important. What was the motivation? He was certain the Emperor was behind it. He spotted the reporter's earpiece and knew he was being coached by others from afar. Yes, we will be attending the ball together. Tyler turned towards Tuzia and smiled before giving her a light kiss for the cameras. It would play well in the broadcast. The next several reporters went quickly, each asking various questions about the war, their plans, their schedules, and other non-Yuso 153 personal questions. Tyler almost thought they were going to avoid the issue altogether. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case. One of the last three reporters asked the question that everyone else had avoided. Tyler didn't recognize the man, and Tuzia hadn't signaled him either. Both were unsure who he represented. Admiral, you mentioned in your speech that God willing, we will win this war and vanquish our enemies. Does this mean you believe in God and think His help is necessary to win the war?" Tyler watched as all the other reporters stared from the reporter back to him and back to the reporter again. They all waited for the response. "Time to go to work." "Certainly not," he answered with the full force of the Admiral's commanding presence. "I have no faith in deities, magic, or spirits to help us in this campaign. No, a united Pulto is what will win this war." "There. Would it work?" "Then, sir, can you tell us why you mentioned it?" "I can. Time to lie." It was a phrase my ancestors used in times of trouble, when a rallying cry was needed to bring the people together and give them hope they could succeed. It is only a manner of ancient speech, nothing more. He waved it off and signaled to the next reporter before the last one could respond. He hoped it would diffuse the situation before it got started. "Mrs. Slay, if I may ask you a question." Tuja didn't flinch. She was born to this. "Certainly," she said. "Your father, a wonderful member of the Supreme Council, once stated that peace may never come between us and Krildon, at least not in our lifetime. Do you side with him on this view? Or do you believe your husband, who stated victory, may be at hand?" She smiled regally before answering calmly. "First, you take my father's words out of context. I know the speech you refer to. I helped write it. His comments were in relation to a negotiated peace that someone else in the council had proposed years ago. So early in the war, his comment about peace never existing between us was fair and accurate." Tyler smiled. She was so good at this stuff. And the reporter looked nervous. Admiral's ghost. "As for my husband, all I can say is that if anyone knows a way to end this conflict, it is him. His years growing up on Krildon provide him an insight into our enemy that few on this planet possess. He understands their culture, their language, and their motivation. He knows how they think. And if you know how your enemy thinks, then you know how to defeat them." Tyler could tell the reporter wasn't expecting that kind of response. He stumbled while he tried to recover and ask another question. Yes, I see." He looked baffled. "Wasn't the, Admiral's father convicted of treason for his actions at the beginning of the war?" Oh, they hadn't wanted to bring that up, but at least they had prepared for the eventuality. Tusia looked angry and was ready to respond when Tyler took her arm and stopped her. "Let me answer that one, dear. It is a fair question." He leveled a commanding stare at the reporter who shied away from the gaze. "It is true, as everyone knows, that my father was convicted of treason for his actions on Krildon at the outset of the war. My father was a great man who held on to his convictions, no matter what the consequences. In his mind, he believed war could be averted, and that many millions of lives could be saved if we had negotiated before it got out of hand. Yes, however misguided, my father truly believed that." He paused to let his words sink in. No use denying facts. "I, however, have never held with his convictions. I urged him to abandon his beliefs and return home, but he did not listen to my advice and sealed his fate. As you know, Krildon executed him as a spy." He watched as the reporter squirmed. He wasn't sure who the man was, but he bet an open attack on the national hero was not going to go over well with either the public or his employers. He knew Marshal Sliss was marking the man and tracking down his employer, even as they spoke. Tyler didn't feel pity. Sensationalism was not warranted here. Tyler didn't care if there were other reporters. He'd had his fill. "Thank you, folks, for your great questions and the time you afforded us. Your warm reception and appreciation has not gone unnoticed." However, we have much to do and we mustn't delay any longer. Thank you for coming, and good day, Uso 155. He and Tuzia waved to the crowd and cameras, smiling before they headed off the platform to the steps leading into the entrance of the Supreme Military Command. Once inside, Tyler felt a wave of relief, but more than that, he felt victorious. They had a long road ahead, but Tyler felt confident they'd won the current battle. Time and the polls would tell. Perhaps he really could pull this off. Perhaps he really could be the Admiral. Similar to the other buildings in the Capitol complex, the Supreme Military Command contained housing for nearly all the staff members who chose to use it. When at capacity, the military complex housed over 20,000 people, including the deluxe accommodations afforded the Supreme Commander. Above ground, the complex soared 15 stories into the sky with wonderful views of the surrounding city. The top 2 stories of the main building were the Supreme Commander's lodgings and offices. These deluxe accommodations came replete with a full staff just smaller than the Admiral's estate. All of this was paid with taxpayer monies, and more than once the Admiral had commented on the extravagance, especially during war. Despite this, Tyler and Tuzia settled into their quarters, each taking a separate bedroom. They were not yet to the point where they would share a bed, but Tyler remained hopeful. In the meantime, he was happy just to have her with him. After the press conference, they spent time debriefing and reviewing the poll results. The numbers proved to be of great relief as they indicated no backlash from his religious comment. His numbers were stronger than ever, obviously rising because of his triumphant return. The Emperor would see the same numbers. Thus it was imperative to show a strong imperial allegiance, uniting Pulto. This took a great deal of the threat away from the Emperor, and made the public feel confident the government spoke with a unified voice. This would be important moving forward as hard decisions were made. Although the buzz in the press concerning the religious comment died down, the Marshal's networks indicated it had not gone away completely. Many religious factions were using it as a propaganda tool to spread their message. It was expected, and the 156 Admiral's Ghost Admiral's staff felt it too, would eventually die down. Despite the optimistic assessment, the Marshal assigned resources to key places in the fringe to keep an eye on things. Everything about the Capitol complex was foreign to Tyler. Even the Admiral's memories provided little insight. Tyler knew the Admiral had never liked Uso, and he suspected this was part of the reason why the Admiral spent most of his time in space. The immense size and abundant populations made it cramped like a spaceship, but the culture and environment did not match. Tyler received all the respect his position demanded, but he sensed an overabundance of impatience. Considering the Vice Admiral's new offensive plan, Tyler wasn't surprised everyone felt pressured. The Vice Admiral had done plenty to build momentum for his plan while Tyler was recuperating in Two-Land. This wasn't lost on the Marshal, who expressed concern that progress had not been adequately relayed to him while absent. Although they did not meet open opposition, the undercurrent was running parallel to that of the Vice Admiral. The Admiral's staff knew they needed a fast, clear path to re-establish their power. The military wouldn't wait forever, even if their greatest leader urged caution. Tyler knew when push came to shove, they would side with the Emperor, who ultimately held all the power. The only way to prevent this was to give them all a better alternative. The problem was they didn't have one. So far, intelligence was spotty at best, and non-existent at worst. The military still couldn't figure out why the Admiral's attack hadn't worked. By all calculations, they should have defeated Krillden and taken the home world. Something went wrong, but they didn't know what. It was as though Krillden knew of the attack. even though it had been one of the most well-guarded secrets. This was why Tyler and the Marshal were uncomfortable with the Vice Admiral's plan. What if it became compromised? It could spell certain defeat for Poulto. Based on that, why did the Emperor side with it? The Emperor was a shrewd man, not prone to rash decisions. Still, something didn't feel right. But Tyler couldn't figure out what. There was nothing in Poulto's history or the Admiral's memories to compare the current situation with. The government had perpetrated the enormous lie and needed a way to justify it. Tyler didn't believe Crilldon felt cornered, especially if they had USO 157 intelligence from inside Poulto. Unfortunately, Poulto didn't have the same intelligence on Crilldon. Most within the Admiral's staff felt it was impossible a citizen of Poulto could betray their planet. But Tyler knew there were no Crilldon within parsecs of Poulto, let alone within the military. Because the two species were physiologically different, it was impossible for someone from Crilldon to disguise themselves as a Poulto citizen. Assuming it was a security leak, that left only one conclusion. They had traitor in their midst. What was the motivation for someone to betray their home world? Money, power. Tyler assumed the list was vast. Betrayal was a common theme in the substance's underworld of Earth, but luckily for Raoul, no one had betrayed his organization or network. If they had, Tyler assumed they would have done it for money and power. On Poulto, however, it was something of a puzzle that Tyler imagined might never be solved. It was hard to imagine such a bitter hatred of the enemy could be put aside just for personal gain. Nearly everyone had lost something during the missile attacks early in the war. The scars from that devastation ran deep, and Tyler guessed most would never consider profiting from the ongoing conflict. Tyler decided it was better to focus on the immediate concern, getting the Admiral's power back. He was thinking about that very problem as he made his way to a conference with the senior military staff. Since returning to USO, the Admiral had avoided meeting with the Supreme Military Command. The Admiral's staff held them off until they settled in. The Vice Admiral was running this conference, and that alone was reason for concern. The Marshal confided he didn't see any advantage or benefit to the conference and had already approached the Vice Admiral with those sentiments. As expected, the Vice Admiral had dismissed them with a wave of his hand. Rumor had it many in the senior staff were not happy about the lie they had helped propagate, and they were anxious to move past it as quickly as possible. A great victory would assist that effort, so the Vice Admiral used this as a tool to promote his plan. The fear was real, and even the Admiral's staff admitted it was becoming increasingly difficult to keep the lie concealed. Too many people had been involved, and too many had suffered. The situation took its toll on military morale, and the senior staff believed a new mission was needed to move past the problem. 158, Admiral's Ghost. Unfortunately, this played directly into the Vice Admiral's hands. Support for his plan steadily grew despite the early efforts of the Admiral's staff. Tyler understood they had their work cut out, especially since the Vice Admiral would use the conference to undermine support for the Admiral who lacked a counter-plan. Tyler feared it might work. A leader without focus, vision, and certainty bred discontentment within the ranks. For the moment, Tyler could offer none of those things. Loyalty only went so far. Tyler walked through the double doors and into a conference room sized for about 50 people around a large oval table. Each seat contained a separate viewer to watch presentations and data. In the center of the table, a holographic projector was used to display three-dimensional plans and reconnaissance intelligence. Tyler accessed the Admiral's memories and noted the Vice Admiral sat at the seat reserved for the Supreme Commander. Tyler moved to the seat at the opposite end of the table, thankful for an end seat. Marshal Sliss had already sat to the right of the empty chair, apparently signaling to everyone else the end seat was Admiral Oslu's. As he sat, everyone stood at attention except the Vice Admiral. "At ease, gentlemen. No need for formalities," Tyler said. Everyone retook their seats, and Tyler acknowledged many of the members with a nod of his head. There were a few empty spots at the table, but Tyler was a bit early. While they waited, he scanned the room. The interior walls, chairs, and small tables were laid out for the aides of the senior staff. Tyler noted the Marshal's aides, Corin and Belen, sat together, focused on their devices. The Marshal stared at his own view screen, while text scrolled rapidly across it. Tyler was informed that, per protocol, a senior official from the Emperor's staff would attend. As a civilian, he was seated at one of the tables against the wall. His position was to the back left of the Vice Admiral, and he was accompanied by several aides. Tyler didn't recognize the man, although the Marshal said his name was Healer. He was one of Regent Sneerd's right-hand men sent to observe and report. To Tyler, he was a spy. The conference would run for 3 days, and the first day was filled with keynote speeches, agenda reviews, and updates on current military readiness. The Admiral was not among the keynote speakers, but the Marshal warned Tyler he would likely USO 159 be asked at the last minute. Again, this sort of impromptu action would play well for Thiessen. The clock indicated 10 minutes past start time, and the last of the attendees finally sat down. The Vice Admiral rose and signaled for everyone's attention. "Welcome, everyone," the Vice Admiral began. "I hope these next 3 days will help bring our war efforts into clearer focus." Tyler surveyed the occupants, but most were preoccupied. Many flipped through papers or stared at their view screens, but this didn't deter the Vice Admiral. "We are fortunate to have Admiral Oslu joining us for the entirety of this event, an event he would normally chair." Somehow, Tyler didn't think the Vice Admiral looked all that ready to give up the chair. "We also hope he will take this opportunity to share his own thoughts on these proceedings before we adjourn a couple days from now." Well, there it was, as predicted. The Vice Admiral wanted to put the Admiral on the spot. The Marshal had been correct. Better to address it now. Tyler decided to stall the inevitable. "Thank you, Vice Admiral. I am more than willing to share my thoughts in these proceedings. However, my staff and I are just settling in, so I am depending on all of you to share your thoughts that I may reflect on your collective knowledge." That put the onus on them, but didn't excuse Tyler completely. The Admiral had a history of delivering momentous speeches at any military gathering, so Tyler would need the Admiral's staff to prepare something before the conference ended. For now, he held the Vice Admiral at bay. The Vice Admiral stared directly at Tyler. "Very well, Admiral. We look forward to you sharing. Meanwhile, let's get underway with our first keynote speaker, Marshal Sita. I believe you are the first." The Admiral knew Marshal Situ quite well. He was a fabulous administrator who ran military supplies. Marshal Situ and his staff were meticulous, making sure everything was accounted for. The Marshal had consistently worked miracles with supply logistics and keeping civilian contractors honest and on time. He was known as the man responsible for trimming fat while keeping morale euphoric state. Tyler had been assured he was on the Admiral's side. 160 Admiral's Ghost. "Thank you, Vice Admiral Thiessen, fellow colleagues and honored guests." He nodded toward Healer, who patiently watched. "We are faced with a crisis from which we have many possible paths." Tyler listened as the Marshal ran down an overview of the losses they had suffered from the battle over Krildon's moon. The numbers had risen since Tyler had last seen them. Apparently, many of the surviving ships were being scrapped due to the heavy damage. They were barely operational, and fixing them would cost more than replacing them. Tyler watched his view screen as statistics scrolled past, painting a picture of the current operational resources. It was adequate for a good defense, but not sufficient for a large offensive. He watched the Vice Admiral as these numbers were displayed. Thiessen showed no signs of concern. Next to Tyler, Marshal Sliss was busy with his device, sharing data with others on the staff. Tyler knew they would be preparing something based on what they saw here today. Finally, Marshal Situ delivered some good news. Most of the defense contractors had new shipments that they'd been working on for the last year. The timing was perfect and would raise force strength to 60% of original. Unfortunately, most of the equipment still required final stages of testing and certification before they could be put into service. The current estimate placed completion between 4 and 6 months. With dedicated military resources applied to the process, it could be sped up by a month. So, this was how the Vice Admiral was justifying his hasty battle plan. Tyler saw they would proceed. The Vice Admiral's plan would require the new equipment, and Thiessen, with Imperial backing, would skip space trials and certification testing to meet his deadlines. Dangerous Thiessen. Very dangerous. Tyler recalled many past battles where entire units were lost because of malfunctioning equipment. This was the reason why such rigorous testing cycles were put into place. Admiral Oslu had set testing as top priority after several bad incidents early in the war. Thiessen was willing to cast all that aside on the slim hope they could overwhelm the enemy's forces. Tyler watched the screen and saw the replacement for his lost flagship. It was the latest and greatest technology Pool 2 could offer. Unfortunately, like all large ships, it needed at least 4 USO 161 months of space trials before it was battle-ready. According to the screen, it was currently undergoing some of those trials. When Tyler looked at the new ship, a small part of him felt a thrill of excitement. He realized the Admiral inside was the source of this giddiness. The Admiral always felt more comfortable in space. On his flagship, he was in command, and he controlled the smaller ships around him. Tyler highlighted the flagship and ran through the specs. The Admiral's memories confirmed everything, but Tyler was amazed at the weapons and capabilities it possessed. It would be a formidable weapon, but not if the Vice Admiral put it into battle before it was ready. Nearly half the weaponry was new designs. To Tyler, that meant bugs and flaws that still had to be worked out. Tyler looked up from his viewer as Marshal C2 delivered the last of the supply news. Production on the mining colonies was at 100%, but this caused backlogs since the depleted forces weren't able to consume the supply chain fast enough. The Marshal indicated it was a problem they needed to solve immediately, as available storage facilities would soon exceed capacity. Marshal C2 shot Tyler a look. Tyler knew it was because Marshal C2 and Admiral Oslu had designed the supply chain together. The Marshal was assuming they would be the logical people to solve the crisis. Tyler agreed, and happily noticed Marshal Sliss taking serious notes. Tyler felt confident they would solve the problem. Tyler nodded to Marshal Setu, indicating, "Don't worry, we will work it out with you." Satisfied, the Marshal finished his keynote and sat down. The Vice Admiral hadn't liked the exchange between Tyler and the Marshal and stepped in to take command of the situation. "Thank you, Marshal. Please contact my staff immediately so we may resolve this production problem before we reach a crisis. Admiral Oslu, I hope we can count on your counsel to resolve this. So, Thiessen wanted to be involved. Fine, let him. Then he will see who really had the power. Tyler smiled magnanimously. Of course, Vice Admiral, my staff and my counsel are always available. 162. Admiral's Ghost. They both knew it to be fall, but played it out for everyone in the room. Tyler noted the Emperor's man watched the exchange intently before jotting notes. Don't worry, Emperor. All is civil for now. The next two speakers took the remainder of the morning describing training and troop readiness, as well as the current defensive plans in place. Tyler's knowledge of the Admiral's memories confirmed the defenses were